Hello, good day, and welcome to Lena Media TV News. I am Victoria, broadcasting from Canada, and these are the top stories. Sudan's media and the fire over COP coverages. UN chief welcomes news of food aid reaching Ethiopia's Tigray. Civilians try to flee East Ukraine as Russia prepares attack. Bringing you this in detail after the short break. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back from that short break. Now, news in detail: Sudan's media and the fire over COP coverages. Authorities shuttered at least 36 radio stations in the first 2 weeks following the COP over their reporting on protests against the Sudanese junta. A period of instability followed, during which Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok was briefly reinstated before standing down in January after failing to reach a settlement between military and civilian leaders. But months of protest and unrest were marked by an uptick in media harassment and attack. Between October 2021 and March 2022, the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor documented 55 violations against media. The Geneva-based right group recorded arbitrary detention, harassment, race, and shutdown of media organizations and physical and psychological assault. Restrictions were imposed on freedom of expression. There were repeated internet blackout, and punitive measures were enforced against media outlets that covered the popular protests and human rights violations that followed the COP. Attacks on the press are part of a broader assault on freedom in the country, according to the Cameroon Hassan, a Sudan expert at the Atlantic Council think tank in Washington. The military is tightening its hold on power, but doing it in a way as to undermine perceived enemies of the state, and those are democratic protesters, outspoken politicians and members of the free press. Around 90 people have been killed and hundreds injured since October 2021, according to local and international rights groups. Sudan's embassy in Washington didn't respond to the war request for comment. Observers say Sudan has experienced major security uncertainty since the overthrow of longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in April 2019. This uncertainty, they say, has been particularly challenging for journalists. Even though the media played a major role in toppling the former regime of al-Bashir, unfortunately, there is still crackdown on journalists and media outlets, said many outside who anchors a weekly show on the national Sunday TV. Article 57 of Sudan's constitutional document, adopted in October 2019, stipulates that the state guarantees freedom of the press, but in a fluid political and security environment, the margin of freedom that journalists have can easily be disrupted by those who don't tolerate critical voices. Journalists could be beaten and arrested, even their families could be threatened if certain authority didn't like their reporting. This led into chaos. Moving on to the next story, UN chief welcomes news of food aid reaching Ethiopia's Tigray. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Wednesday welcomed the news that trucks with food assistance and food reached Tigray and Alpha following the declaration of humanitarian truce. Through a statement, the top UN official called all parties to keep momentum and to follow through on their commitment to facilitate the provision of humanitarian assistance to all people in need. They reiterated his call for the restoration of public services in Tigray, including banking, electricity, and telecommunication, as well as commercial access. The United Nations reiterated its unwavering commitment to support peaceful and prosperous future for all Ethiopians. Moving on to the last story, civilians try to flee East Ukraine as Russia prepares attack. Desperate evacuation attempts from eastern Ukraine were underway Thursday as authorities warned of an imminent Russian offensive following the devastation around Kiev that has shocked the world. Russian troops have been withdrawing from around the capital and Ukraine north, leaving a trail of destruction as they prepare for unexpected assault on the country's southeast. Scenes of carnage that Ukrainian officials have accused retreating troops of leaving behind in towns including Bacha have sparked outrage and led to a wave of fresh sanctions against Moscow. But on Thursday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that Russia was understood and continued to accumulate fighting force to realize their oil ambition in eastern Donbass, begging civilians to leave the region. While it's still possible, local officials in Donbass, Luxor, and Donetsk said the region was already facing constant indiscriminate shelling. For those unable to leave, he said, tons of food, medicine, and hygiene products were being delivered as part of massive humanitarian effort. The head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration said strikes had targeted 8 points. The enemy aimed directly there with a goal to destroy the civilians. He added that people were heading calls to flee and he would be coordinating evacuation to make it faster and more effective. Shells and rockets were also slamming into the industrial city of Severodonetsk, the easternmost city held by Ukrainian forces. More than 11 million people have been displaced since Russia invaded on February 24th, aiming to seize the capital. With that goal threatening, Russia is instead trying to create a land link between occupied Crimea and Moscow-backed separate statelet in Donbass. Ukrainian forces are also regrouping for the offensive, including on two-lane highway through the rolling eastern plains connecting Kharkiv and Donetsk. Trench positions were being dug and the road was littered with anti-tank obstacles. As preparation on the ground ramped up, Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba demanded NATO members help Ukraine boost its firepower. The evacuation calls are being fueled by fears of fresh atrocity after telling discoveries in areas from which Moscow troops have withdrawn. U.S. President Joe Biden said major war crimes are being committed in Ukraine, while images have emerged in recent days of bodies where there has bombs or shallow grave. Civilians executed in cold blood, bodies dumped into mass graves, the sense of brutality and inhumanity left for all the world to see. In one of the world's effective towns, Buka, some residents were still trying to learn the fate of loved ones, while others were hoping to forget. The Kremlin denies responsibility for any civilian death, and President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday accused Ukrainian authorities of crude and inciting provocation in Bacha. But the German government pointed to satellite pictures taken while the town was still under Moscow control, which appeared to show bodies in the street. Russia denies are, in our view, not tenable. Germany government spokesperson Stefan Habstrand and Ukrainian officials have warned another areas may have suffered worse than Bacha, including nearby Burr. Locals talk about how planes came in during the first days of the war and fired rockets at them from the altitude of this building. Officials have alleged that Russian troops are now trying to cover up atrocity elsewhere to prevent further international outcry, including in the besieged city of Mariupol. Ukrainian human rights official Liam Dinazal said on Telegram Wednesday, citing witness testimony, that Russian forces have brought mobile crematoria to burn bodies and other heavy equipment to clear debris in the city. Western powers have already plumbeted Russia with debilitating economic sanctions, which have forced Moscow to make foreign debt payment on dollar-dominated banks in rubles, raising the prospect of potential default. British energy giant Shell warned Thursday that it will write off up to $5 billion after signing its gradual withdrawal from the countries last month. On Wednesday, the White House unveiled further measures targeting Russia's top banks and two of Putin's daughters, while Britain sanctioned two banks and vowed to eliminate all Russian oil and gas import by the end of the year. The European Union is also poised to implement fifth round of sanction cutting off Russia coal import, and European Council Chief Charles Michel said that sooner or later it must also impose oil and gas sanctions. As well, the United States and British have pressed to have Russia excluded from the UN Human Rights Council, with a vote in the General Assembly scheduled for Thursday. But in this nightly address, Zelensky said although the sanction package had a spectacular look, This is not enough. He urged countries to completely cut off Russian banks from the international financial system and to stop buying the country's oil. One of the foundations that allow Russian leadership not to take seriously the negotiation on ending the war. Peace talks between the sides have been made little progress so far, and NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg has said there's no sign Putin has dropped his ambition to control the whole of Ukraine. This is what end the news on Alena Media TV. I am Victoria, and thanks for watching.